What I try and stay away from, and I think this is quite important, and I think this is the challenge as a CEO in today's day and age, I think we lived in an era where everybody felt the need to weigh in on every issue, right? Now CEOs need to decide what issues they weigh in on.
All right. Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program, Women in the Workplace, The Path Ahead. So excited you can all be with us today. Thank you for joining to explore with us where women stand in the workforce and their experiences. It's wonderful to have you all here for the discussion tonight, and we hope you will all be allies, change makers, in pushing the needle forward towards equity in the workplace. Before we dive in, I'm going to give a quick reminder for those with us in the room to silence your phones. And if you want to, both in the room and those joining online can submit questions. And in the back half of the program, we'll get to some of those. By way of introduction, I'm Alexis Krivkovich. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey & Company. I lead our Bay Area office, and I'm the global head of our people and organizational performance practice. I'm also one of the co-founders and authors of our Women in the Workplace report, which is now in its 10th year. Every year over the past decade, McKinsey, along with leanin.org, has studied the effects of the workplace experience for women and men. And over time, we've built what's now the largest data set that exists on diversity in corporate America. Tonight, we're going to talk about the progress we've seen over the past decade and where we have not. And we'll have a hopefully very lively discussion about observations and reflections on what we see looking backwards and what the future might bring. It is my pleasure to introduce our guests tonight, Sukhinder Singh Cassidy and Padmasree Warrior. These are two brilliant female leaders. I couldn't be more excited to have you both with me on stage. Thank you. Sukhinder is the CEO of Xero. She's an experienced Silicon Valley executive with over 25 years of global leadership experience. She's been the president, Asia Pacific and Latin America at Google, the president at StubHub, the founder of The Board List, founder and CEO of Joyous, and co-founder of Yodlee. Sukhinder has experience as a board of director as well in public and private companies, including Upstart Holdings. Padmasree Warrior is founder and CEO of Fable. Previously, she was CEO of NIO US, a China-based EV company, the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer at Cisco, Chief Technology Officer at Motorola. Padmasree is also a board of director at Spotify and Mahindra, and a former board of director at Microsoft. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and jump in. Before we get to the specifics of the report, I just want to start with maybe a bit of an opener question, and Padmasree, I'll go to you first. Why are you here tonight? What gets you excited about this topic? And how do you take stock of the last 10 years?
I think it's actually a topic that we should continue to discuss, right? Because as the report pointed out, we still have a long ways to go to reach parity, 48 years or something like that.
Indeed. We're going to get to that. It's a little depressing.
Okay, you're going to get to that. But I think when I saw that, I felt like, wow, we still have a long ways to go. I think to measure things and to understand where we stand in terms of equity and parity in the businesses that we're all part of building and leading and working in is so important. That's why I'm here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sukhinder, how about for you?
Oh, gosh. Well, I guess I'm here because I'm a CEO who thinks all day long about how you access all the world's talent. I've obviously thought about that as a board director and starting the board list. And uniquely, obviously, somebody who's also a person of color and woman. I have a very personal stake in the whole thing, in addition to having to care deeply about this as part of my day job, which really is always involved just recruiting and retaining great talent. So for me, it's like kind of, if not this, then what as a CEO? Like not thinking about these issues, then what issues?
Excellent. Well, let's start. We're going to dig into the data and use it as a bit of a frame for your experiences and observations. And Sukhinder, maybe I'll start with you. And we'll start at the beginning of the talent pipeline. So we'll kind of roll the clock back in your both your careers. And what I want to start with is a phenomenon that we've long researched called the broken rung. And so for those who aren't familiar with it, the broken rung is the phenomenon we found in the data that the most inequity in opportunity starts at the very beginning, in the first step up to manager. For every 100 men, 81 women. Mm-hmm. We looked at this data for the first time in 2018. In fact, you and I were on stage together in 2018 talking about it. That number for every 100 men, 79. So in 6-7 years, we've seen virtually no progress. Mm-hmm. And it's even worse when you look for women of color. When you think about this issue, kind of what's your observation? Have you experienced that yourself? Do you have a view on why the broken rung is so persistent and challenging to solve?
Yeah, well, I definitely have a view on it, as you know, and maybe a more personal one. First of all, I think there's been so much focus on the C-suite in the boardroom that in some ways people gloss over this, right? So I'm really grateful that the report kind of pulls it back into the foreground because there has been a lot of focus on women in leadership. And in fact, I spent a lot of my career thinking about how to get women into the boardroom and other places. So I think, first of all, it's just been forgotten. So I think keeping on pulling it back into the limelight, I think is quite important. And you asked if we had any personal experience with it. And I was sharing with you that when I was young, I had both a really positive and a really negative experience with the broken rung. So when I first arrived at Silicon Valley, one of the stories I often tell is I arrived into my first job in the Valley, and on the second day of my job, I was an analyst, so I was an individual contributor. My boss told me that I was scaring the secretaries. And I watched the really volatile behavior of a male colleague who he knew, who would just get away with temper tantrums and all sorts of stuff. And I had been used to being a really celebrated individual contributor. I'd been promoted multiple times. I'd been in investment banking. People told me I was great. And then here's this guy saying, you're sort of the rookie. And I'm like, I'm not really sure what I did to scare anybody. I just got here. And this gentleman, he screams. And everybody's afraid of him. But I'm getting the coaching. I don't get it. And so I quit my job. And then I went to a company called Junglee, which was started by a number of Indian kind of founders in the Valley who dropped out of Stanford. And ultimately, the company got acquired by Amazon. And I was just about to quit, thinking I'm not ready to be here. I luckily go to this other company, and they not only gave me responsibility, they gave me my first managerial opportunity. And I was sharing with you that we got to Amazon, the company was acquired. 6 months later, I was a sales leader and so were others, and they elevated me above my peers. And I got my first managerial opportunity when I was 28 or 29 years old. And what I remember is my colleagues, particularly my male colleague, was really mad and bitter that I got the job. And he was really rude to me. And I was really intimidated by the fact that I was managing him. And he kind of was no offense, a bit of an and so I kind of made my way through it. And years later, and he's a lovely person, years later he said to me, you know what? Sukhinder, it's so good to see you. Back then I was a bit of a jerk. I'm like,
self-awareness is
and
key.
I was like, thank you for saying that. Yeah, it was a little tough to be your peer and then go to managing you. But what I appreciate in hindsight, looking at the broken rung, is I had this one experience where someone's like, you're doing something wrong. And the very next day I quit that job, not within 6 months, and went somewhere else. And they not only bet on me, they promoted me on top of my peers. And so I was intimidated. I was young, but they made me a manager and they gave me that opportunity and I stuck with it. And that did set me on a different course. Yeah. So I feel like I have kind of been on both sides of that equation as a young woman in business. And I can see it. I can see that he sort of was well, I'm the guy, you're the girl. You were both about the same age. Why'd you get the job? And I'm like, well, why did I get the job? I'm like, well, maybe I was qualified, but that was a bet. And it shouldn't have been a bet, right? Why was that such? So I think of it and I understand very viscerally how that can be true. That's how I think. But now we haven't talked about solutions yet, but I'm sure you want to get to Padmasree.
Well, I guess the question I'd ask next is, do you have a view of why it's so tough and so persistent? Because I look at this issue and I think, gosh, this is early in career. You don't need 20 years worth of experience. You don't need the vast array of technical skills that you might have developed over all sorts of moves. You don't need a big network of supporters and sponsors to get that first leap. It should be the easiest, and yet it's the most inequitable.
I think it's hard, right? I think your first job as a manager of leading people is always intimidating, because I think most of us start as individual contributors. When you start a career, you're an individual contributor, you take pride in doing your work and you collaborate with others, but it's still your work. And you learn how to do that well, right? There's always a dilemma, especially in technical fields. You're a great engineer, doesn't mean you'll be a great manager. So being a manager anyway is a tough job, like figuring out, I know in my own experience, I got promoted very early to be a program manager in my career. I think I was like in my early 20s. I had no idea how to lead people, and I was leading a few other engineers. And as engineers, we problem solve. I was like literally telling everyone what to do, but then quickly realized, they're not thinking anymore, because I'm like, they're waiting for me to tell them what to do. And that's the wrong way to motivate people. So there's that transformation you have to make from a skill set perspective in how you excel at doing what you do. If you're a great analyst or a great engineer, to now I have to motivate others to think and contribute and do great things. It's always a tough transition. That first transition, once you figure it out, then you apply those lessons. I think people assume that women want to continue to be individual contributors, and in many times take women out of the equation, which is sort of, I think, still exists today. That bias, built-in bias, unsaid bias exists, and they expect women to be the ones to raise their hand and say, I want the job, whereas men, I think they assume, they're ready for promotion. I think we have to fight that inbuilt bias. It shouldn't be it's not our responsibility as women to always say, yeah, I'm ready for that job. Like in your case, someone saw the potential, saw your capabilities. I think it is the system that needs to make that change happen, and then give you the skills to be a leader, right? Like, it's different being a subject matter leader and making that transition to leading people. So I think we have to invest in also developing women to be more ready to take once you do get on the rung, how do you make sure it's not broken? You stay on the rung so you can climb the other.
We don't want you falling off
the ladder. Exactly.
I think this issue of unconscious bias is so real, meaning, do women want it? Some presumptions they may or may not. Do some people project more confidence than others when they have the exact same experience set? So I think this point of like, why do you have to lobby for it? Right. I think that when we look at our experiences, I'm sure it's that someone saw your potential, right, and offered you the opportunity equally, as opposed to making presumptions of what you do or don't want. So of course I believe that all of us, men, women, need to learn to pitch ourselves effectively. I come from sales, so of course I believe that that's important, but I believe it's equally important and incumbent, when you are looking for leaders, to assess all the potential people who have the capacity to lead with intention, including at the first rung.
Well, it's so interesting you hit on that point, because we've looked at the question of ambition again and again, and women are just as ambitious as men are. And that number does not go down and has not gone down through COVID. So these pervasive and really corrosive narratives of lazy girl jobs and opting out and just not wanting it enough. It's very clear from the data, not only is that not true in terms of aspiration, but what's getting in the way is not women's individual ambition, desire, or skill set. It's the structural bias, it's the unconscious bias, it's a system that was built originally to not have them in the workplace. You both touched on age, early career, being really young, the first opportunity. And let's talk about that a minute, because this was a new piece or lens we looked at this year in the data, was ageism. And I think no surprise, women and men, as they get older, say they feel that their age potentially gets in the way of opportunity. Certainly true in Silicon Valley, I would posit, where that's especially true. But what was surprising, and I think really important to see in the data, is how women in particular describe that phenomenon early in career as well. In fact, half of women under 30 say they feel like age keeps them from having opportunity, a number much, much higher than you would see for men. We joke in our team room, I said it's like an avocado. It's like not ready, not ready, not ready, ripe, too late.
Exactly.
So, I'll open up to either of you, but how do you think about that issue? Do you see it? What advice or thoughts do you have?
I think it's very real, by the way. It happened to me. I have a crazy personal story about this. So I think you're absolutely right. I think women feel ageism on both ends, right? Either you're too young or too old. And I think as Michelle Obama said in her speech at the DNC, there's this Goldilocks complex, right? Like you're waiting for the perfect time and age to be, in order to be given an opportunity to be successful. So I became CTO at Motorola. I was very young. I think I was in my early 30s. And no one would take me seriously. People wouldn't believe I was the chief technology officer for a technical company. I would go to customer meetings. They would completely look past me and talk to people who were in the room who were on my staff. And this got to a point where actually it was somebody in HR that told me that's because people think you're too young. Like you look too young and you don't look like you're old enough to be a chief technology officer. So believe it or not, I actually used to dye my hair white so that I would look. There was a product back then called Silver. I would make my hair white here. It looks, if you Google on the internet, you'll find these very weird pictures of me with like this little.
Well, Beyonce has white hair now, so you were just ahead of your time on the trend.
I literally I felt like I had to change my appearance in order to be taken seriously. And it was so real that, that feeling of people thinking you're not capable just because you either looked young or you are young. And I think women face it much more, right? And we have to I think we still have to, according to your report, we're still walking that fine line. We just can't be who we are and taken seriously for what we know rather than how we look.
Wow. The white hair, it's like now.
Now I do the opposite, just for the record.
Well, let's maybe shift gears then to talk a little bit about we were talking about the beginning of the career. Let's talk about the top of the house, because one of the bright spots is the progress we have seen in the C-suite. So this year, we have 29% of the C-suite executive teams are women. Now, that's not equally shared gains for women of color. That number is much lower, 7% for women of color. But we started 10 years ago, that number was 17% for women. So we've seen the biggest improvement in the C-suite. But I'd argue those gains are really fragile. And they're fragile because when you get under the hood, how a lot of companies got there are not sustainable or repeatable ways. So the first thing that companies did on average was they added a seat at the table. And Sukhinder, we've talked a bit about these different roles and the importance of all of them, but how some ladder towards CEO, like you both are, and some are far less likely to. And the seats that were disproportionately added to the table were what we call staff roles, which means incredibly important support and corporate function roles. This can be an HR leader, general counsel, but they tend not to be roles that ladder with high frequency into the CEO seat. So companies added a seat at the table. They tried hard to fill that with a woman, but you can't in an infinity add seats at the table. And then they often looked outside, not inside. So they disproportionately hired from afar. We've talked about this quite a bit. How do you think about that question of building a healthy pipeline to the top?
Sure. Well, first of all, I will say I'm not going to do very many zero plugs, but I will do one because I'm super proud of this. We are the only company, we're listed on the Australia Stock Exchange, not NASDAQ. We're the only company in the top 300 companies listed on that exchange that has 75% of the pipeline seats to the CEO seat filled by women.
Wow.
That means our CFO is a woman, our CRO is a woman, our CPTO is a woman.
Wow.
Obviously I am, I think. And interestingly, what would be considered, and our CHRO is also a woman, so that's one staff role, but 3 line roles, or lines with direct successorship opportunity, right, that are historically a successorship items. Now, how did we get there? I think if you expand the question beyond sort of being proud of that stat, I think the reality is, I think when you think about those broken rungs, I think once again, you have to back up and say, when it comes to line roles, throughout that mid to top level ascension, people ask me, what does it take to be a CEO? I'm like, it's super clear, P&L responsibility.
Yeah.
Like P&L, P&L, P&L. Somewhere along the line, you have to be on the hook for a number, and you have to drive the commercial outcomes of a business. And so I think as you all are building your pipelines, I think not just about a seat at the table, think about which seat. And I think we have to put women into more commercial ownership roles. However that's defined, like in product companies or in tech companies, that might actually be the product role, right? Because that's where the P&L maybe gets manifested in a PLG different company. In Procter & Gamble, it might be something different. It might be a general management role. But I think you have to basically pipeline very specifically in the roles that have commercial ownership if you ever want to get women to the top of the stack. So I think that's the next nuance. Now, actually, happily, to your point in the report, one of the things I'm happy about is that we are talking about that nuance, because there was a time that all we were doing was talking about the women in the C-suite and women in the CEO's role. And what you can see is with intentionality, corporate America is getting there, right? Now it's about, okay, well, if you want to get there faster and better, now think about line roles as much as staff roles. So I think, but I think you have to recognize the progress and then say, okay, now it's time for Act 2. Okay, that was like kindergarten, maybe middle school. It's time for high school and university if you really want to build deeper pipelines.
I love that. I do think, it's interesting how many times I sit down with a company and we start looking at their data, and they're incredibly proud, and they should be, of progress they've made.
Yes.
But it's like diversity hotspots and deserts.
Yes, that's right.
So if all your diversity is huddled in one quarter and none of it's somewhere else, you don't get that benefit that really is the deep value of having multiple perspectives around the table, because in fact, you're actually concentrating on both sides. Padmasree, what have you seen? I mean, you've spent your whole career in technology. Spoiler alert, tech is not one of our forward sectors when it comes to advancing on multiple forms of diversity. But what would be your observations?
Yeah, I actually feel like we need to move the conversation beyond DEI, right? Like diversity, equity, and inclusion. I feel like we need to start talking about belonging. Yeah, definitely if we want to see more women in influential roles, I would say influential roles that lead up to the CEO role, right? We have to develop a combination of skills. I think in a tech company, the tech industry, I believe you have to understand the product deeply in order to figure out how business models change, how are you going to monetize, how will you commercialize. That is so important. And I think this combination of understanding technology, understanding disruption, understanding the impact it will have on business models, those sorts of skills are really important. And I think you mentioned that women of color or people of color actually have not made that much progress, right? It's only 7%. Yeah, I think your report said.
In the C-suite, 7%.
In the C-suite. That's like really small movement. Yeah. So that tells me there's still othering that happens, like people who are others, not us. That definitely is influencing our thinking at all levels. And I think while we celebrate that women have made more progress, I would say net, we have to make progress across the board. And to do that, we have to move the conversation beyond DEI to what I call belonging. I know in my company and the companies I'm on the boards of, I really emphasize that. To me, they are different. Diversity means your team and you're hiring people that are different from each other, right? And that's good. Equity means you treat everyone, right? I'm simplifying. Equity means we're treating everyone the same. Inclusion means you're giving them a seat at the table. But what is the price for giving someone a seat at that table? What price are you asking them to pay to have that seat at the table? We need to start thinking about that. If you're telling women or a person of color that they have to behave a certain way, they have to change who they naturally are in order to have that seat at the table, you're not helping them belong there. And they will never have that seat be an influential seat at the table. In my own career, I think we were talking about this. I'm from India originally, and when I started working, I'm an engineer. Like I said, I was working in the tech industry. People told me, I grew up in a culture that was full of color. In India, people wear colorful clothes. You just see color everywhere. And so I would go to work in wearing bright colors. And actually, one of the head of HR told me, you know what, like maybe you should dress more in black and gray because that's what everyone wears here, especially in technical roles, to be taken seriously. And for a while, I was actually changing my image and who I am in order to have that seat at the table. And that eventually catches up and you don't feel you're authentic, right? Like, to me, that is not how you can be successful. You have to let people be who they are. I think for us now, the focus should be on belonging and getting rid of this othering in order to make that progression throughout the pipeline, for sure. I mean, if you're going to run a business, you have to have business skills. But I would argue it's not enough anymore. The pace at which technology is changing, you have to, especially, I mean, you can say tech industry, but really technology touches every industry. I think the ability to learn and, picking people who can learn different skills quicker, I think that's where the focus should be, rather than their historical resume of what jobs have they done in order to get. And I actually think companies are seeing that change, right? Leaders are, I think actually Alphabet or Google had a study that said what they thought would define success in a career is actually different from which people are successful. It's people who are able to learn faster and who have curiosity as a skill. So how do we measure these sorts of things? So I feel like we need to look at people with a very different lens and create environments of where they can be truly who they are in order to be successful, and we get rid of this othering.
Yes to that, for sure. It's interesting, your last comment there gets to this idea of gatekeeping, which is, we have a concept of what are markers of success. They're often deeply rooted. They go way back. But if you kind of look at just what the data tells you about what truly creates a very successful manager, an excellent technologist, especially in a highly dynamic environment, a sales leader who can drive revenue, very often many of the criteria that we think are most important by the numbers don't show up.
Right.
But they tend to be correlated with certain types of talent, certain types of privilege, certain types of access that is skewed towards certain individuals, and very often can shed diversity or diverse talent before they even have an opportunity to give it a shot. And I think it's interesting that you shared an example of someone giving you that shot early, and what maybe had seemed risky, but in fact, what was risky about that? Padmasree, you talk about, the belonging piece, and I want to stay there for a minute because we have this phenomenon we highlight in the report about onlys. And the idea of onlys is the feeling and sensation that we've all felt this. You step into a room and you look around and you immediately think, oh, so I will be the woman today. And in fact, 1 in 5 women say they experience that with some frequency. I think that's a high number in today's environment, recognizing 48% of our entry-level talent is women and 51% of our human population. 1 in 5 is quite a bit. And if you are an individual of color, that number is 2 in 5. So very high frequency that you step into situations. And it takes a toll. I'd be curious, just to build on your comment, what have you seen is the sort of pressure or the downside risk we face when we kind of structure a workforce with only experiences?
Yeah, and the only can be anything, right? Like the only can be, I'm the only woman, I'm the only person of color, I'm the only person working remote, everyone else is in the office, or I'm the only person in the office, I'm the only person here with an accent. It can be anything. I think all of these things are factors or characteristics or labels that we create where in a way we are making that individual feel isolated versus feeling like they're part of a community. I think companies I find, in my company, we're a small company now, I have a startup, but I used to do this even at Cisco when I had a team of 26,000 engineers. I feel companies and leaders have to take the time to break the mold almost. How do you make it okay to talk about not work at work, right? Where you're giving people permission to be their whole self as a human being. So you have to create rituals where it's okay for people to see who I am as a person in addition to my job title, right? Like in the work environment, one thing I've noticed, by the way, is when we introduce ourselves, we always introduce ourselves with our job title. I'm Padma Shri Warrior. I'm the founder of Fable. I'm Sukhinder. I'm the CEO of various companies, long list of companies, etc. We don't say I'm a mom. I'm an artist. I love making jewelry. I love to dance. Whatever it is, all these things define us as human beings. That to me is what creating a culture of belonging is, making it acceptable, giving people the permission to do that. In my company now, our calendars are transparent. All our calendars are open for anyone to see, and we make it okay. I put like my Pilates classes on my calendar, and people know I at lunchtime go do Pilates. Okay, they won't book a meeting. My team members I have to pick up my kids. I have a soccer game to go to. It's all fine. These are all things we do in our life. That doesn't mean we're working any less. I think these sorts of small things go a long way to create that culture of belonging where you don't feel alone. You don't feel like I have to hide the fact that I'm a mom and I have a sick kid at home, or I'm a parent, I need to go to a game this afternoon. Back in the day, we used to hide those things. We never talked about those things. That isolate us and make us feel like we're alone. We're the only parent here with a little kid. I'm the only woman here. I'm the only person of color here. I'm the only person celebrating an Indian holiday. I need to take the day off, whatever it is, right? I think all these things that isolate us, how do you actually bring it forward and make it okay for people to express who they are? So I think creating rituals inside companies, which are different, by the way, than habitual cadence things we do, like town hall meetings, operations, reviews. Those are things that we do to keep the machine running. But what are the small things you can do to make the company culture change where it's okay for people to be human beings at work? I think, to me, that's really, really important. That's sort of what I mean when I say creating cultures of belonging.
I love that. I'm also impressed you're doing Pilates at lunchtime. I'm like, note to self. Let me shift gears a bit. Sukhinder, we talked a little bit about this before stepping on stage. There's a bit in the zeitgeist right now about DE&I, backtracking, backlash. And in fact, for the first time ever, we see that company commitment to diversity has stepped backwards. We're seeing less from companies in terms of their own stated commitment. That's also true to some degree of leaders and managers when they kind of declare their commitment, and the engagement of employees as allies, as individuals who support efforts for a more inclusive workplace. We've seen that really flatten. What do you think is going on? Easy question.
Yeah, easy question. And just one last thing. I think on the previous point of belonging, I think one important thing, if you are the other in one dimension or the only, you're not that in multiple dimensions. Mm-hmm. So I do think one solve for people, whether it's ERG groups or at Xero, we have this thing called Connect Before You Correct, where we just run a connection ritual on our monthly senior leadership meetings. But the whole idea is that to find something in common, right? And so I do think it's important, like, yes, maybe you are the only person of color, but you're likely not the only parent. You're likely not. So I think we just have to accept and understand that if you want to find belonging, you may be the only in one category, but helping people find clusters of belonging and other things, I think is an easy solve. that we have to sort of, because it's very easy to say, I'm the only of this. I'm like, okay, but then let's help build communities around many other kind of topics or areas of interest. So that's one
love
solve,
that.
I think, and it's in a very pragmatic solve, right?
Yeah.
Because it may just be the case that you are the only on this. So what are you going to do? Right? You have
Right.
so I think as a company, building multiple groups of belonging, I think is quite important. And then coming to the point of like, why do I think it is? Well, first of all, I think we're going through the politicking of many kind of non-politicized topics on which many normal people would agree. Like if you go into the average company that has men and women, people of color and people who are not, people who are different sexual orientation and aren't, and you ask the average employee, would you like to have a culture of belonging and inclusion? I'm pretty sure at the employee level, no one's going to drop the mic and say that's a bad idea. So to be clear, what's going on is the making political of issues that I think are what a lot of average employees or teammates would agree on, which is like, yeah, I'd like to come to work and I'd like to be accepted for who I am. Yeah, that sounds good.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah,
Don't sign me up for that
I'd like
culture.
my personal values to overlap with the organization where I spend 8 hours a day. That sounds like a good idea. Like, so quite frankly, this is common sense. I get quite annoyed by how all of this has been made political. As it's also true that, you know, as you pointed out, I don't know, 51%, 52% of the planet is in fact women. So I'm not sure why it's a big issue to think that you want to access all the talent and retain all the talent and make it possible for all the talent to be, you know, considered for any given role. So quite frankly, I think that this is a very American phenomena. I feel lucky at times like this, speaking frankly, to work at a company that's global, that sits in this, you know, it was founded in the Southern Hemisphere where nobody wakes up every day and says, God, why do we care about this? I think this is a moment in time in a very political landscape of the US. And I think you just have to dumb it all down, honestly, and be like, most people wake up and they want to go and work in a place they belong. And they work in a place where they feel like they can succeed and that they are on a level playing field with other people.
Sounds very simple when you put it that way.
So I don't know that there's
Why are
much
we
to
having so much
debate.
trouble here?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know that, like, I think all of these things are, you know, quite frankly, being taken to an extreme.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's a question, are companies, according to your study, pulling back on how much they're emphasizing the importance of
it's a bit of a mix, and I'd love, you know, maybe both of you can weigh in as CEOs who have the ultimate decision on many of these policies and programs. The scorecard for corporate America is quite mixed. So on one side, we see very real progress that absolutely we should celebrate. And I'd hope and believe is here to stay. Things like more paid maternity and paternity leave, both. More structural programs of support that benefit all employees, but emergency childcare, more benefits, and health benefits. All of those things are great wins, and I hope they will be permanent. But on the other hand, you do see stated commitments stepping back, and also some of the tailored programs that historically really supported diverse talent and allowed that talent to have greater access that by the data they historically did not have. So in some cases, this is ERG groups, but it's also mentorship and sponsorship programs, internship programs, access points.
Yes.
For women.
Yeah.
So I'd just be curious,
Yeah.
you know, maybe you can take it in turn, Padmasree.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that I have seen that. I think there has been definitely a positive movement, I would say, in the last decade or so, in the sense that, you know, people can speak up more. I do find people do speak up more, ask for what they feel they need in order to be successful in large companies, smaller companies. I think that's changed dramatically in the last 10 years. Companies have, I think, overall, at the macro level, there may be exceptions, do now have more systemic things in place, like parental leave. You know, I remember when I had my kid years ago, I had to go back to work after 3 weeks. That was all the time I got off. I think that's come a long way. I think those sorts of structural, you know, ability to have childcare support, companies stepping in to support parents with all of that. I think structural things have improved, which is all, I think, positive change. I do find off late more conversations where I feel we're going backwards, like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that 1 step back, I feel, is coming from this flexibility. I think during COVID, companies had to be flexible to allow people to work from home. And we all figured out how to make that happen. And I think now companies are struggling to get people to come back into the offices. So they're taking almost extreme positions, insisting that everyone needs to be back in the office 5 days a week or 6 days a week, whatever it is, full time. And people are having a hard time making that adjustment. So in that sense, I think people interpret that as, oh, mate, my company used to give me more flexibility, now they're not. I think there is some happy balance there in how do we give people the flexibility they need to be successful without compromising effective teamwork and having in-person interactions. I think taking extreme positions, forcing everyone to come back and commute hours and hours to get to the office, I don't know if that's the right answer. I don't think it is. My company, of course, we are a big believer in the power of communities. My company is all about micro communities that get together to discuss books and TV shows and stories. And by the way, reading is a very powerful tool for mental wellness. And so we encourage people to read more in these micro communities. And we have a B2B angle as well, where companies actually set up ERGs, form groups to read books together. Because it's a lot easier to discuss tough topics through something you're reading versus personal attacks about, you feel this way, I disagree with your point of view. So using these innovative tools, I think we have to build these micro communities. And where I feel like we have maybe taken a step back is taking away that flexibility completely that you have given people. We've all given people during the last few years when we were in lockdown and COVID, right? I don't know if that's the right strategy companies should take.
So Andy Jassy's over here. You're over. That's good, diverse perspective. Sukhinder, what would you add in terms of how you've thought about like the policies or programs that move the needle? This kind of mixed scorecard. You've seen it across. You've seen a lot of different companies and their models. What would you observe?
Yeah, I'll tell you. Again, I feel like a simpleton, so I'm just going to say that in some of my views. I wake up every day and I think, my job is to help the people at Xero thrive and help our customers thrive. And I'm going to try and drive the policies that make it possible for people to do the best work they can. Period. And if that means giving flexibility, great. If that means also, giving performance reviews, so be it. Like maybe we did away with at Xero at one point, we, in the post-COVID time, they were optional. Now they're mandatory again. So I believe in both flexibility and performance reviews. So both those things can coexist, by the way. Yeah. And so I guess most days I wake up and I say, look, what I want to do is choose the policies that help our employees thrive and helps the company meet its objectives. What I try and stay away from, and I think this is quite important, and I think this is the challenge as a CEO in today's day and age, I think we lived in an era where everybody felt the need to weigh in on every issue, right? Now CEOs need to decide what issues they weigh in on, right? And mostly I wake up every day and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to choose not to weigh in on Twitter and in the big universe of what everybody thinks everybody else is doing. Mostly I'm going to wake up and try and do the right thing by the people I'm responsible to serve as their leader every single day. And I'm going to do the best I can to find that balance. And I'm going to worry mostly about communicating with them. And that's the stance I choose to take because that's the way I want to be spending my time. So you do have to take a point of view on certain things, and that's your job as a CEO. I think it's also your job at some point in time to be like, choose not to take a point of view on certain things and be like, you know what? And I think that's the fine balance that leaders need to find right now. Some people are like weighing out on COVID and hybrid work, and other people are deciding not to weigh in on DEI issues. And most of them just like, your job as a leader, you do need to have a point of view. Yeah. But do it for the people you're responsible for. Wake up and try and do right by them. Some of your decisions can be popular, some are going to be unpopular. But mostly, I believe that our teams and our customers want to understand what values we're living by for them. And that's, I wake up every day just thinking about those are the people I'm going to communicate my kind of ideas to, interact with, get feedback from, pick a lane, drive forward. Yeah. And I think there's just a lot of just noise in the system. And man, you could spend your time on all that noise.
It is certainly amplified out there on platforms for us to consume every micro moment. And I think you highlight a really tricky issue because it's challenging enough to lead inside an organization, but then when so many of your movements and choices are getting sort of splashed externally, often without context. You know,
It's hard. I think my point is, like, as a CEO or a founder, like, you need to be transparent. That's true, but you also need to feel like find the through line that helps people make sense of why you make decisions or not.
Yeah.
And find that through line in your values and what you commit to.
Yeah.
And that's
I think the thing, though, I think we're all humans at the end of the day. We have a point of view that's influenced by our society. It's difficult to separate, right? Like, we're all influenced by where we live, what's happening around us. I think the thing that's important for leaders of today is, because there is information everywhere, we find out what's happening around the world instantly. It's important to explain your thought process. I mean, to me,
Yes,
I
the
think
why.
it's important to explain
Why.
how you arrived at a particular decision. It may not be the decision everyone expects you or you expect everyone to agree with, but it's really important to explain the reasoning behind that and give the context of how you arrived at that decision, why you made that decision given the information you have, and how it affects people. I think that is a skill that leaders of today uniquely need to have more than perhaps 10 years ago. And people expect that, I think, of leaders. Yeah, it's okay, you made this decision, whatever, to lay off people or force everyone to come back to the office. Why? Why are you forcing everyone to come back?
Yeah,
Why do people
why?
need to clock in that they've come back every single day? I think you need to explain the reasoning versus just saying, no, I just want everyone back in the office tomorrow.
The why is the important thing, right?
Yeah.
People want to know, like, why,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and that you want to be in a dialogue with you, and you should be in a dialogue with
Yeah.
your employees about why.
I love that piece of the putting the context around it, especially because, I mean, we are facing a moment where so much of what's happened over the past 5 years externally is truly things we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Certainly in our career lifetimes, if ever in history. Global
Exactly.
pandemics, inflation at levels we haven't seen in 40, 50 years, supply chain shocks, a lot more instability in the global geopolitical context. And in fact, one of the questions here kind of gets at that. How do you think about how macroeconomic trends are shaping how companies think about what they prioritize? And, for our conversation, how diversity and the importance of efforts around inclusive talent, how they're able to fit that into that picture. I mean,
Yeah.
what would you
Well,
say?
I just want to pick up first and foremost, as it relates to this topic. Like, we could go
No,
wax
we could go.
lyrical about
That's
like
the
the
next
macroeconomic
conversation.
environment. But as it relates to this topic, I think I want to come back to what I think has happened that is not going away.
Yeah.
Okay. So what has happened is, whether it is a George Floyd moment, whether it is COVID, whether it is inflation, like, what the instant access to information on what others are doing has led to, quite rightly, an expectation that there is a dialogue about the why. And I don't think that genie is going back in the bottle. Like, I just think that is maybe the most interesting trend for today's CEOs, and why they're navigating all these issues in public, right? Because it is true that everybody else's opinion on what everybody else is doing is out there. And employees, and particularly new generations of the workforce, they want to be in a conversation that I think is pretty values led. Like, I don't think that is going away. This idea that, yes, your employees do want to know what the company stands for, what you stand for. Now, I think the tricky balance is, like, as I said, finding that line. Where do you weigh in? Where do you not? Do you weigh in on geopolitical issues? Do you weigh in on issues of orientation? Do you weigh in on issues of women? So where do you draw the line on social issues that you weigh in on, or social issues that relate to work? Or, like I said, political issues. All of these things I think that, to me, is the macro trend that's not going away. That CEOs have to think about how to contemplate all of this in a public sphere, and be in an active dialogue with your employees and your customers, because they expect it.
I mean, that suggests a different skill set, and
sure.
some might argue a skill set that historically has been described as something many women do especially well, an empathetic
they do.
leader.
They absolutely do.
A communal
I think
leader.
one of the new skills, by the way, I think leaders need to have more now. I think this context of macroeconomic trends. Like I was saying, every business is always influenced by whatever's happening in society. It creates opportunities,
Yep.
right? Because of society's focus on something creates new opportunities for us to invent something. That's been the nature of business throughout our history. I think the thing that's different, though, that the few skills that leaders, especially CEOs, but leaders need these days, more so than even 5 years ago, definitely more than 10 years ago, is active listening. I think because we get so many voices, even within our company and from the outside, you have to really have the ability to listen actively and then filter out what is noise from signal. That's a very sophisticated skill set. And, frankly, we are still learning how to do that as well, even within our own company. I have a team of 30 people. Even within that, I had 26,000 people at Cisco, but I think it doesn't matter how many people you have. It's that ability to figure out how do you actively listen and then filter the noise from the signal and articulate what you're drawing from what you listen. I think that's really important and a very effective skill. If you're leading people, you need to have that skill, or you need to develop that skill now more than ever. Some things we all faced globally in the last 5 years have changed the world forever. It's not a reversible change, right? I actually feel like flexibility at work is not a reversible change. You cannot force. I think people now know I can work from home and be as productive. Why should I come to? I think that's one example. Having global access to talent, globalization used to mean something very different 5 years ago than what it means today. I think these kind of things are very, very important. I think a few years ago, if I was starting a company, I would have thought first, I'll build a product, I'll test it in Silicon Valley, I'll launch it to the US customers. That's no longer the case. I built a startup 4 years ago. We have users from all over the world. And so we constantly get requests on, why is this such and such? You're building this for the US market. You have to listen to those sorts of input, which was not actually a model in Silicon Valley for success. Was build a product, test it in the US, then go global.
Right.
It was sort of like, that was the blueprint every company followed. For example, that flipped completely around in the last 5 years. So I think there are some changes that are not reversible, that we all have to adjust our thinking. Even what we learned as leaders growing up in this industry, we have to unlearn certain skills to learn different skills, right? It used to be that you were considered a leader if you were very vocal and you could articulate and give big speeches, get on the stage. Now people want leaders who listen first, not just speak first. So it's very, very interesting flip almost. So I think as leaders, some of us have to unlearn what we learned and relearn new skills.
I'm going to go with this is also possibly something that will favor women leaders.
Absolutely.
I don't actually have that in my data, but I'm just going to assert it. There's a question here. I think it's a terrific one. Sukhinder, I'll start with you. Let's bring men into the conversation.
Sure.
They make up the other 49% of our human race. They make up 52% of our starting pipeline of talent in corporate America. And by the time you get to the C-suite, they're the vast majority. In fact, by the time you get to senior leadership, you don't even need to wait all the way until you get to the folks around your leadership tables. They are the majority by far. How do you think about the role men should play, how we include them in this conversation? What have you done that you find works?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, to your point, men are already at the table. And I think it's maybe important to talk about what really effective male leaders do that helps this, right? One of the things we know they do is they're effective at identifying objectively the potential skills are needed for the role versus the actual kind of historic experience. So I think when I look at the men who, and by the way, I'm sure you're going to find this with a lot of women leaders, my career has been disproportionately affected by men to the positive. Yeah. I've only ever worked for male leaders. So clearly there's a role they play.
By the numbers,
right?
that is
by the
very
numbers.
often,
And I would say my lived experience is, the men who were very effective at building teams that accessed all the talent looked at potential before written experience. Often saw the opportunity for me to do a job before I saw it for myself. So that is I would say that is one big role men play. And I would say the other role that we can't forget that men play is as the partners to women. And I mean at home, right? So I think that we've also gone through not just a world where many of the successful women you see, in fact, benefited from men who saw their potential before they saw gender. And I think that is incredible. And I think we also, many of us, live a world where we have partners who see our career potential as equal to, if not greater than theirs, and chip in to do everything that's needed to make that possible, including negotiate at home for what they're going to do. So I think that, I think that, look, I think it at its fullest, it feels like it's not men versus women. Yeah. Honestly, it just feels like a group of people who row together. So it's funny. Yeah, you were like, what about men? And I guess mostly I wake up and I'm like, yeah, I am surrounded by amazing men.
Yeah.
All the more amazing because I'd say they created environments in which I could flourish too. Not more than them, not less than them, just equal to them.
Right.
So that's the way I think about it.
I think it's such an important point. I often get asked, like, well, what do you say to those who lose out as a result of this? And what I say is this is not a zero-sum game.
Nobody's losing out.
This is not Game of Thrones. Like, we don't need to knock people out along the way. Like, the idea here, sure, any one seat should be filled by one person, but the idea is to create an equal access, so great talent in all of its forms.
Right. It's just equal access. Right. It's just access to opportunity. It's a level playing field. It's not a tilted playing field. It's just, hey, like, let everyone thrive who should be able to thrive.
Now, that said, by the data, what we do see is often men say they don't feel as well positioned to be sponsors and mentors to diverse talent because they don't feel like they have the lived experience. And the challenge, of course, is when you disproportionately hold the leadership seats, lived experience or not, you have to be able to show up. And Padmasree, I'd be curious, is there anything you found you've done over time to inspire that action, that engagement from men?
Yeah, I think I was just looking back as you were asking the question. My entire career, which is now almost 4 decades, I've had one woman boss. So I have mostly benefited from learning and mentoring and sponsorship from men, bosses and peers. And I think some of them are very effective in being sponsors and mentors. I've learned a lot, and some were not. I think it's a mix, right? And so what differentiates, I think maybe I think back and say, what did I find to be an effective sponsor or a mentor? What characteristics did they have? And are they teachable? And how can we transfer that skill set or knowledge to others? I think first and foremost, they focused on capability and potential. I think seeing the potential in somebody, not seeing the gender or the color, really focus on what are you capable of and what have you contributed, what can you contribute more. And then honestly giving frank feedback. I think that's something people hold back sometimes. And I think in my career, I've benefited from one mentor who actually told me one time, I went to him and said, hey, here's all the data. Somebody needs to make a decision to stop this project. And said, so what are you coming here for? So I said, well, I want you to tell our CEO that we should stop this project. I said, well, it's your data. You drew the conclusion. You should go tell the CEO that we should stop the project. I'm like, no, that's above my pay grade. I was like, it doesn't matter. It's you're capable of doing that. So it gave me that honest feedback. Like, you know what the right thing to do is. You just are afraid to do it, and you want someone else to be there. You should go present the data and say, this is your recommendation. I'll give you air cover. I think to me, that lesson has stuck with me for so long. In the beginning, I thought like, wow, it's being very brutal in this feedback I'm getting. So I think one of the things I think people can do when you're mentoring or sponsoring someone is not just giving positive feedback, actually help people correct themselves, help people grow. You don't have to be brutal or harsh in that feedback, but really focusing as much on how they can improve, how they can grow, how they can do the next job. Sometimes telling people you need to do a lateral move before you can go up. These kind of things are so important and have helped me in my career. I think this is where I think we don't want to put men on the defensive where they're like, oh my God, now I'm afraid to say anything to women or people of color in my organization because it will be not politically correct and I don't know how to talk anymore. We don't want to put them on that defensive, but like giving them the skills of be a mentor, be a sponsor, help that person understand how they can grow in their career. And having empathy, by the way, that's, I think, the other skill. Women are definitely better at this. You sort of like, again, goes back to active listening, but understand where that person is coming from versus being judgmental about whatever that issue they're bringing to you is. I think those are certain things I feel like we can help men do better in order to become better allies for women.
Yeah.
There's one more thing that I think is important, which may be obvious, but I think in this conversation cannot go unsaid. The men who I think are allies, I will say, recognize some of the unique challenges women face mid-career, and they make it work for them. So we can say that doesn't matter. It absolutely does. Padmashree talked about being a young leader. I was 34 when I was offered the opportunity to lead our Asia Pac and Latin American operations at Google. It used to be called Rest of World, like literally the rest of the world, beyond the U.S. and EMEA. And I think I've told the story before, but both my boss and I give him full credit, Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google at the time. I was pregnant, 35 years old, wanted to stay in the job. I was like, I want to stay in this job. I am pregnant and I manage everything from Brazil to China. And they made it possible.
Yeah.
They paid to fly my daughter and my nanny around the world to stay in that job for 2.5 years. Those were men. And so I think it would be foolish to say that when women get in the mid stages of their career and they are mothers and they still, and by the way, I did have an amazing husband who also carried some of the load, but just to do that job required my husband, my boss, and the CEO of Google to all make it possible.
Yeah.
So I would just stay in the leadership ranks. I mean, so it does, I will say that the men who recognize that women still do carry a really big burden at home and offer flexibility at home or at work to make it possible to not drop out, that is for sure one of the keys to getting women to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Google's a big company and not everyone
can do it. But my point is whatever flexibility you can offer.
But I think to me it's really important to have the empathy to say, yes, I know you are going through this. You're going to have a child. You're worried about your career. It's going to be okay. That goes a long way, even if you can't fly nannies around the world.
Yeah, and by the way,
I mean, people
for sure. But my point is they had cash, right? Yeah. As a startup, when I was a founder of a startup, I could give my women my women or dads flexibility for parental leave. But I'm just saying women in the mid-career drop out. And if there are not policies that allow them to stay in, and in a startup it's flexibility, at Google it's money, whatever it is.
Yeah, even if it's not policy, giving them the permission to say, I have this issue.
Yes.
I think sometimes helps. I think that I don't want it to be so difficult where people have to feel like, hey, to help women be successful, I have to support them with nannies and all that. I don't think it's that hard. Yeah. I think it's just like having this conversation to say, I know what you're going through. I'm here to help you. I can help you with whatever you need. Yeah. I think that little thing can go a long way.
But you have to have it mid-career. Somebody who sees how difficult it is when you are the primary caregiver and you have young children and you're pregnant and you have to make it possible for women to stay in through that period.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, we are in the final moments. This is a lightning round. We're going to fast forward, looking ahead 10 years. We just look backwards. What's one hope you have for the future, one encouragement you have for those listening? Go for it, Padmasree. We'll go to you first.
I think the hope I have is that we will see more people of color, more LGBTQ plus people in leadership roles. And, we focused on gender and made progress in the last decade. I want us to broaden that perspective now to really, really creating this culture of belonging. And we'll have a world that hopefully will feel more like it's more inclusive and goes beyond inclusion to helping people belong. And that'll translate to business, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Sukhinder.
I think for me, I will come back to where we started. I'm really struck by the broken rung because I think that we have spent so much time in the last 5-7 years focused on the top of the stack.
Yeah.
And it continues to sit with me. I hope that when every person has the opportunity to become a manager or to give somebody else the opportunity to lead, that you are very intentional of taking that 79% and moving that number up. That is all intention. And intention at the beginning, I think, is what I hope for. Like, I really would love to see that stat, be crushed. But I think that that's just intention at the beginning when everybody's potential and nobody has experience. No, bet equally on potential.
I love it. I love the future both of you describe. I hope we're here talking about how we conquered it. And we shortened that 48 years to 10 or less. That's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Sukhinder, Padmasree. This has been wonderful. I was so excited about this conversation, and I feel like we could just keep going. But we won't. Don't worry. It's been just incredible, though, to hear your perspectives. You have both amazing careers and really diverse career experiences. And so I feel like I've learned so much and you've shared so much.
Great report, by the way.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
For the report. I read the whole thing.
Cover to cover. For the audience, thank you for all of those of you who are here with us in person. For those who've pre-registered for our networking event, that's going to be upstairs to the rooftop. So you've got a great view to close out the evening. And if you want to engage in future programs, join us as a member and support the Commonwealth Club World Affairs organization. You can visit the website at www.commonwealthclub.org. And thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again soon.